It began like any other evening. Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Let us go to the other side of the lake." It sounded simple, routine. They had crossed this water many times before. Several of them were fishermen. This lake was familiar territory. So they climbed into the boat. The sun was beginning to set. The air was calm. The water was still. And Jesus fell asleep. But somewhere in the darkness, something began to change. The winds began to rise. At first, it was just a breeze. Then it grew stronger and stronger. Clouds gathered over the water. The sky darkened. The wind howled across the lake. Waves began crashing against the boat. Water poured inside. The boat began to fill. This was no ordinary storm. Even the fishermen knew it. They had seen storms before, but this one was different. The boat rocked violently. The waves grew higher. The wind screamed through the night, and fear began to grip the disciples. Meanwhile, Jesus was still asleep. Finally, the disciples ran to him, shaking him awake. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Think about that moment. The wind roaring, the waves crashing, the boat nearly sinking, and the disciples convinced this was the end. Then Jesus stood up. He looked at the wind, he looked at the waves, and he spoke. "Peace, be still." And instantly, everything changed. The wind stopped. The waves settled. The water became completely calm. The disciples sat there, staring at the water. Then they looked at Jesus, and he asked them a question. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" But the disciples were no longer thinking about the storm. Now, they were thinking about who was in the boat with them. They whispered to each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And that question is the center of the story, because the storm reveals something they had not fully understood yet. The man sleeping in their boat was not just a teacher, not just a prophet, not just a miracle worker. He was the one who commands the wind, the one who commands the sea, the one who holds authority over creation itself. Storms still come into our lives today. Moments when everything feels out of control. Moments when fear begins to rise. Moments when it seems like the waves are too strong. And sometimes it may even feel like God is silent, like he's asleep in the storm. But the same Jesus who stood in that boat and spoke to the wind is still the Lord over every storm today. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not that the storm disappears immediately. Sometimes the miracle is realizing who is with you in the boat. Because when Jesus speaks, the storm does not get the final word. He does.